So I'm Jesus Cabana from Walter Reed from the DoD, and to start saying that everything that I'm saying here today is my opinion. It's not federal government or anything like that. So we're in this second session here, and most here will be very kind of simple conversation and presentation that we will have here. Because we're here at AMIA15VisualAnalytics, David did an amazing job describing the principles. How do we design this? Now we want to make sure, you know, when you walk out of this room, you have an understanding of what is out there when you see different visualizations, different papers, different animations, different posters. They show different kind of visualizations. At least we want to make sure that you walk out of here knowing how to do the interpretation of those. Also, thinking about, you know, what has been done or not done in clinical settings. So that's kind of the application domain. Now we'll be focusing on the application domain. And why this is important. As I mentioned, we are here at AMIA. And while David was talking, I was just wondering, you know, how many EHR vendors have considered all those principles in visualization? How many, you know, visualization techniques currently exist within EHRs that allows the providers, the clinical staff, to be able to look at the data effectively? So that's why we're here. That's why we design. We have been working on that working group because there is a lot of work to be done in this area. Because we have seen how organizations continue to incorporate new health IT systems, new EHRs, connect to more and more information exchange systems, and that poses a lot of interest from the provider's point of view. You know, interested in analyzing how can we analyze more effectively the longitudinal data. Now that we have historical data for the patient, we have access to that. We want to better understand the history before coming with the diagnosis. Also, clinical staff. You know, nowadays, most patients, we have kind of a diagnosis based on Google before we go to the patient. So we need to figure out what is a better way to communicate information to the patient. Information. Patients also are interested in how they can track their movements, their health information. Organizations are interested in empowering departments and clinics to analyze and explore their own information. Because from the administration point of view, you want to look at ways to better understand the dynamics of the clinical workflow, room for improvement, what can change, and things like that. So, and researchers, you know, we're interested in looking at the whole data set, trying to analyze patterns, and to find unknown correlations, unknown patterns, and things like that. So data visualization, what David was describing before, and visual analytics, you know, present a great potential as a method to analyze, filter, and illustrate that clinical data. Why? Because it provides that representation of clinical data that will allow providers, clinical staff, patients, administrators perform tasks more effectively. And that's what, once again, what David was talking about, the task of the table, find the top 3 numbers. We want to be able to do that. And also, hopefully, through the visualization technique, unlock potential hidden patterns. So how popular is data visualization? So I went there yesterday to PubMed, and it's okay, how popular is data visualization in healthcare? And here I was talking about, and most of this presentation will be about data visualization, not the medical/scientific visualization, which is what you see in radiology, the 3D volumes and so on. I will be focusing in data visualization. So I searched thousands of papers nowadays that talk about how they're using visualization, data visualization, to illustrate the clinical data. And actually, we can go plot it, and we can see that during the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, there has been a huge increase in the number of publications that are saying we are using data visualization to be able to show and depict this clinical information. And there are many, many factors that influence what we have seen now. One factor is the data, more and more data. Other factors is people understanding the need of data visualization. Along those lines, I will talk about this, because this happens within clinical settings quite often, and this is something that it can happen to us. We can go and we have, let's say that we have a small study, 11 patients, and we come up with this table saying, you know what, the mean is variable X, the blood pressure, blood results or heart rate or whatever. We say, okay, X is the mean is 9, the second variable, the mean is 8, and things like that. We can go to someone and say, hey, give me the information about these patients or give me the information about this clinic, and we can deliver something like that. However, if we don't look at the data, this is what can happen to us. It can be what? This set of patients, or this set of patients, or this set of patients, or this set of patients. All of those data sets have the same mean, same standard deviation, the same mean both X and Y, and things like that. That's the importance of going and looking at visualization, taking our clinical data and also visualize it, because just looking at those basic descriptive statistics can lead to misleading information. So, is visual analytics applied to healthcare and medicine new? Well, no. Back in the 800s, before, in Great Britain, we saw that Dr. Baker, back then, he started utilizing maps and show the areas that were affected by the epidemic outbreak. But then that was in 1831. That didn't lead to a lot of information about what was happening with the epidemic. 20 years later, sequence epidemics. 20 years later is what David showed before as well. It was John Snow that he was like, hey, if we believe that the disease is caused by air, then it should be evenly spread out throughout the city. If it's water, then it should be clustered around the water pumps. And that's what he did. He just took a map, and we can zoom in this section. You can see that he drew the water pump, and then around it, you will start seeing, hey, there's more outbreak around that. So he used that analysis distribution between the black dots and the relationship with the water pumps to be able to determine and come up with hypotheses and the reason why the outbreaks was happening. And then, since then, also in the 1800s, this one, it was more of the importance of, there was a war, British soldiers were being treated in Turkey. The sanitary there was not great, so this nurse went there and started recording the death toll in the hospital. And then 4 years later, she went back to England, she published this book. And actually it's very interesting. I'll put a legend here. This is the months: April, May, June, July, August, September, so on. Year 1845. Then this is another year in 1856. You can see 55 and 56. But you can see that here, other cause of death, and it's slowly preventable. Sanitation, so on. And then after some policies were put in place, then you start seeing the plot, at least the big one, the outlier here, going down. So since the 1800s, people have been using our healthcare data. We need to analyze it, we need to visualize it. And for those of you that have been in medical school or nursing school, most likely you know the fishbone diagram, right? You need to know a lot of the association between, you need to better understand that. So you know, some of you might know what is the salty bond with sugar. The salty bond with sugar is how we usually remember it. But that's another way to illustrate data that people have been using for a while to simplify the task of analyzing these results, blood results. So since then, nowadays, you walk around and you go to the posters, you go to other conferences, you go online, and there are data visualization everywhere. From not so much in the EHR systems, but there are a lot of data in the dashboards from the CMIO point of view, a lot of visualization that are requested from apps, a lot of visualization. So what we'll do is walk you through some of the most widely used visualizations in healthcare to make sure we understand when you can use them, when we should not be using them, and how to do the data interpretation of them. For example, tables, lines, scattered plots and bubbles, radial or circular plots, graphs, hierarchical and tree maps, and GIS. We will go and walk you through each of those visualizations and extension of those to make sure that, hey, when you walk out of here, if you have a task that you have to do on a data set, then you can say, hey, I learned about this visualization technique, that it might be appropriate for this or might not be appropriate for that. So let's start with tables. Tables, I will not go into a lot of details about this one because what is the most simple visualization approach that is used to illustrate data. The data is arranged in rows, basically the items, and the columns are the attributes. The values are dependent in which attribute they belong to, and readers can make comparison across attributes. So what is good about tables? It's very effective for presenting precise information. You need to show specific numbers. Tables are good, and there's nothing wrong with tables. And also it's widely accepted, very easy to understand. However, there's some limitations. If you're trying to show trends, you're trying to developments, how disease is developing in this patient, the impact of a specific treatment plan, it's very difficult to convey that in a table. Or, for example, also, there's no specific message you're delivering with the table. You can create other plots that you can guide the user to highlight the outcome of something. With a table, you're showing precise information, but you're not conveying a single distinct message. As David showed before, extension to tables is kind of adding colors to them, or the heat map. The heat map also used for correlation purposes. And, for heat map, what do you need? Okay, it's two categorical attributes, x and y. Basically, we have one x, we have another y. And one value. Basically, in this case, I was using correlation. I want to show the correlation. I remember which one was this one. I think it's blood results that I was just displaying here, or anxiety and depression, I think it was. But basically, we want to understand the correlation, and the heat map is effective for that task. It's good to find clusters. It's good to find outliers. It's scaled to millions of items, to hundreds of attributes. And how many levels? We should keep it below 10. Because then if you start adding more than 10 colors, it might be very difficult to do the data interpretation effectively. So even though I'm mentioning that it's scaled to millions of items, millions or hundreds of attributes, there is also some limitations. For example, I showed this one. This is from the Nature 2012. Doing the correlation between 87 genes. Right? And this is very good from the high-level point of view. If I want to know, you know what, the group, the genes A, B, and C is fairly correlated, everything that is within A with itself. And then there's some correlations around here, there's some correlations around there, and so on. So to show this from the high-level point of view, yes, it provides a significant amount of information, but it doesn't provide precise information. So to do that, a lot of what we can do is enable the user. We call it adding the user in the loop. Allow the user to filter, select, instead of 87, have a drop-down menu or something, or checkbox that they can pick. 87, then select all, or select none, and only 10. That way you engage the user at analyzing the data. That's one way. Another way is create filters in such a way that you can resort the table. Therefore, you once again engage the user at analyzing this complex data set by either increasing the number of variables that they want to analyze, or by sorting the variables one way or different ways. So those are, some tips about tables, which is basically the simplest visualization technique out there that we can use. Then line charts. Line charts is basically one of the most widely used plots in medicine. What is the data? Basically two quantitative attributes. We have X, time, and we have Y, a specific value. So that's the basics of line plots. It's good because it's great to show trends. And we all know this. If we need to show what is happening with the patient, the outcomes, it's great to show things over time. Comparing different categories and they change over time also is great for that. However, it's not that effective in terms of identifying discrete data elements. That's why, if you use Excel usually have a way that you can put the table at the bottom. Is because people know that line plots will not give you precise information, identify discrete information there. Also, you can play around with the glyphs, the marks, what David was talking before. Lines, it will show that there's continuity. The connection between the marks emphasize the order. Basically, is the patient was here, the patient is getting worse, the patient is improving. So by connecting the marks, then we're showing kind of an order. That's why sometimes you can change the visualization to only include the marks. If there's no an order, when you want to show that, so then you can use the marker. But then I mentioned that we only have two attributes, X and Y. So what about if we want to add a third attribute? So you always have to consider saying, if I need to show this and I have a third attribute, there are ways to go and say, what? Let me have two axes. You have to be very clear with the axes. You have to make sure all the legends are there. But in this case, what I did was for a specific clinic, the dates, the number of people that were getting specific treatment, and then here's the number of patients. Here's the average age. That way, in one visualization, I can add a third attribute to it. Another way to do this is the line thickness. This is not widely used, but it's kind of good. I was looking at outcomes, saying, this is sleep. I was looking at a clinic, a couple of hundred patients. I have pre-admission after discharge, after a specific treatment. And I wanted to look over time, several years worth of data. And around 2012, the green line here shows that patients, how many of them are improving and how many saying they're above the threshold and so on. Then the thickness of the line is the number of patients that I have. That basically they were being discharged from the specific treatment, they're receiving a CPAP and doing this and that. So, so the thickness of the line, we can use it to detect, in this case, how many patients I had in a specific month or specific quarter. And there are a lot of other things that we can do with lines. And one that I will discuss is parallel coordinates. Parallel coordinates, let's say that we have n patients, 1,000, 110, whatever. And we have n clinical elements, blood pressure, labs. What about if we display each of those clinical elements as vertical axis with individual ranges? Right? Say x1, x2, x3, all the way to x7, different clinical elements. Then let's draw the patient, illustrate the patient as a line that goes through that. So we go one patient, the next patient, the next patient, the next patient. So this allows us to find very easily outliers. What is happening? Anyone should be around here while this patient is all the way at the bottom. And then if you, what I was talking before, allows the user to interact with the system, allow to interactively define specific ranges, because each of these has different ranges, then the user will be engaged and will start analyzing the data. I know it looks like a mess. This was just a very quick example to show that you can select, you have a lot of clinical elements. This was for psychiatry patients. And I will say, okay, let me go depression above a specific threshold. But this is just a quick and dirty example. Let me go to a more meaningful one. First, we can go to every patient and say, okay, how that patient changes. So you can kind of compare multiple variables at the same time. Then you can select a range. Say, I want patients that are within this range, in this specific variable, and within this other range, and this other variable. What that allows us to do is define a way to create cohorts or subset of patients. For example, there I was picking a specific range, another specific range, and I have used this tool to say, you know what, I only want to analyze those patients. I want to analyze the patients that have have anxiety, have depression, don't have PTSD, and are between 20 and 30 years old. So I can pick different ranges based on the data, by looking at the data, interacting with the data. And this is one of the benefits of parallel coordinates. Another one is the parallel sets and Sankey diagrams. In this example here, green means there was something. This is from a paper from last year that we did this workshop at AMIA, and this paper was presented there. So green means that they're normal patients. Blue is borderline patients. Control is in orange, and uncontrolled patients are in red. And this was mostly for diabetes. The diabetes is not control, is control, border, and normal. So this, even though it's kind of difficult to use and make interpretation if you don't have the system in front of you and you are interacting with the data, but basically what is happening is each of these axes are different time points. Let's say once a month or once a quarter for many, many years. Year 1, 2, year 4, year 5, 6, 7. This one they were using about 15 years worth of data in just one plot. So you can see the patients that are on control. If you perform the interaction with the system, this part are the uncontrolled ones. You can see that most patients stay there until they die. But when you interact with the system, you can find the patients that go from here, and behind you can see those lines that are going very gray now. That's what is happening. Some patients are going from here to down here, or from this kind of visualization. You start from, start at the right. let's say that you're looking for specific outcomes. And here's where the patient started. You want to understand how the trajectory, how the patient got from here to there. So some patients, and I will play this, and here I'm not using patient, I just an example. You can start looking at specific events that are happening over time. And this over time, you say, okay, this set of patients went from one to the other one. So for example, let's say these patients, all of them, let's say these patients, some of them went here, some of them didn't go there. The patient that made it here, most of them went to this other event. So imagine that this is different diagnosis. I deal a lot with psychiatry patients and PTSD and concussion for the DoD. So this is very useful for us because we want to understand, okay, how a patient gets to PTSD. So from the concussion to PTSD, some of them go to the neurology side. They start having a lot of sleep and headache issues. Some others go to the behavioral side. They start having anxiety, depression, and other disorders. Others go to the therapy, physical therapy side. They start going to have PT therapies, they have acupuncture and things like that. We want to understand how they get to the last PTSD, and we start at the left, the first concussion. So this visualization helps with that illustration. So then the next one would be circular plots. Yet another visualization that we can use to engage users to do the data interpretation, to perform the clinical interpretation of the data. But it's 10 o'clock, so what I will do is 10 o'clock on the dot. So what I will do is let's take a quick break. We will be here if you have questions about what we have been discussing so far. But please, let's come back in 20 minutes. 20 minutes, 15, 1, so we can get back on track, and I will start talking about circular plots and how you can use that to present your clinical data.